Right, good. So the next thing on our agenda really is the coursework, the individual coursework. And basically what we're going to do in the individual coursework is to prepare a tender for people to apply to do a job for us. Behind this, there are two possible scenarios. One is to say, in the scenario you'll get for the coursework, which will come out fairly soon, there's a company that has a product which they've launched, but they've just decided that they need to expand their product range, and the group of people want to convince the board that it's time to actually either do one of two things, either to expand the company itself or to put out to tender to another company to do a new product that we've got in mind as a technical group. We know that this product could make money, and it could probably make enough money to make our other product more viable. So obviously I'll need to describe to you in the coursework a bit about the two products that I'm thinking about, but what you need to go away and do is work out the background costings and possibilities, and looking at the process of tendering and things like that. So there are two parts to the individual coursework. One is to work on the actual tender document, which is reasonably easy to do, because what you do is to get a template that you think fits a software development project, and you kind of make another document which is your reasoning. And it's your reasoning document that's more important in terms of you've worked out why have you chosen this tender document to model as your tender document and stuff like that. So behind all of this, you will need to do some financial calculations. You will need to work out some potential profit and loss situations. And I'm going to go through some of the calculations you might be able to do. And in the beginning of this lecture, I'm going to illustrate one or two things that aren't just risks that are obvious to the financial side straight up front. So there are upfront things that are risks, but there are other things you might need to think about in the background. Risks of not doing the project, what impact that will have on your company, as much as what if you do the project, if your company takes on the project. So some of this material appeared previously in a previous module given by End Ozcan, if that's the right way to spell his name. And so I've admitted that some of these slides are his, not mine, but I've had to modify them so that I make sure that I think the maths inside was correct. There are still, as I noticed last night when I ran through these slides, there are still some typographic type errors in this material, so I will try and point those out as I go along. So, what are the objectives of this lecture? One is to understand why future sums of money are discounted to their present value. So that's one way of looking at the value of doing an investment. What we do is to say, right, what we've had to do is say, in 2 years from now, our product will have this much income. So how much is that worth now? And so is it worth investing that much money in our project, or are we going to make a loss, basically? So we need to look at that one. The other one is then to work out how to do a discount rate, which we get by working out our discounted cash flows. Hopefully, by the end of this lecture, or at least by the end of this set of slides, you'll have some idea what those terms mean. I hope to do a better job than I think the man who was in this room was doing with his mathematics before we came in, because I think he was getting it wrong. But I was sitting out there listening, and I thought, no, that's not what you mean. Anyway, we're going to calculate two things: net present value, which is what we get for the discounting our future sum, and the internal rate of return. Both of these are functions which companies use to determine the value of doing an investment. And I'll do a quick intro of a company, a number of companies I worked with, for whom this internal rate of return idea was their vital decider. And I think some of the companies made very big mistakes as a result of just looking at that factor. And so I want you in your individual coursework to think about other factors that might be at play. So here's my background. I did a PhD quite a long time ago now, and it didn't prepare me in any way for what I did in the rest of my life. I did a PhD in solid-state physics. I can talk about phonon mode softening at the Briançon Centre of cubic crystals till the cows come home. And I can actually make people who don't have a clue what that means understand what it means, because I've tried that before now when I was learning how to lecture. Anyway, so that was my PhD. When I got out of my PhD, I went and got a job, and my job involved me in automation, basically, looking at the possibility of automating all sorts of different processes. We were very successful, and it's not just me. The people I worked with also had their part to play, and we were very successful in doing a lot of things. We did the first automated continuous arc welding that has ever been done in the world, and it was better than the best welders could do once the Welding Institute had looked at our welds. Before us, people had only done spot welding, and that's the major thing they still do, is spot welding. So if you go into a car factory now, you'll find robots there spot welding everything. But we did what's called continuous arc welding. We did the world's first ever truly flexible manufacturing cell. And in doing so, we redesigned the motor that we were manufacturing to the point where they didn't need our automation in order to up their production rate by twice. So, in fact, they didn't automate their line with what we did, but they did up their production rate to twice what it was. Advising on automation. Now, one of the major things that I looked at in my first job was automating in the investment casting industry. And I was quite surprised when I went to visit them that they focused on, a lot of them focused on the rate of return. So the IRR, which we will work on how you work out. The other thing they would have used was the net present value. And so when you're doing that, you need to look at, okay, so I want to invest, my idea is to invest in this automation in this particular area of work. I'm going to automate this production line, I'm going to automate this part of my factory. If I invest this money in doing this, what will my rate of return be? And can I compare that to alternative rates of return I might get from other investments? So, what would they look at as their alternative investments? Any ideas what you might, here you are, you're a factory owner. Have you ever been a factory owner? Probably not. You want to decide whether this money I've got is to be invested in my factory in automating this line, or doing something else with it. What do you think you might do with it? Yes? Marketing. To up your own company's income by getting more work. Okay? How would you meet the more work that you got? How would you meet the greater demand? So you'd employ more people. So those would be costs you'd have to offset against the cost, the amount of money you made. Yeah? Good idea. Any other ideas of what you might do with the money? Got a pile of money. What are you going to do with it? Go on holiday? No. Yes.
Reinvest.
Reinvest what in?
You can do diversify what you're working.
Diversify. Okay, that would be another way to go. Look for other things that you can make. Yeah? Which is one of the things that we're thinking about. We've got a product that is quite expensive compared to what some customers might want to buy. So we've got to be able to look at other ways of making money. One of the things we could do is diversify. Look for other things you could do with our equipment. Yeah, that's one of the things you may well have to take into account when you do your coursework, right? How could we diversify? Yeah, somebody else?
You could look at like diversifying location as well.
Sorry, look at the location.
Diversifying location. So if you're based in like say one city, and you
Right.
get an online presence, then like spending money on being in other places might also be useful.
Redeploy somewhere else. Yeah, the lots of companies have done that. So there's a games company come to Nottingham because the East Midlands Development Board and Nottingham City Council gave them incentives to come here. That's kind of reducing their costs. In the same way, Sheffield, which is where the games company came from, gave similar inducements for the Curry's support group. What's it called? Knowledge thing that they have. They gave money for them to move to Sheffield. So you win some, you lose some. Yeah? So that's another thing. Anything else you'd think of? You're thinking of really good reasons, other things to do. What too many of the people I was working with thought was, look, in Asia at the moment, Southeast Asia in particular, I can invest there. I can get huge returns compared to what I'll get from automating my factory. So I'll do that. Okay? That was a bit of a short-term view. They looked at that idea, and those who took the short-term view, a number of those companies no longer exist. Yeah? The one major company that said, no, we're in this for the long term, we need to do this, and started to invest, are now the market leader in what they do. Yeah? So, still exists. If only I knew then what I know now. One of the big problems with the alternatives is not just finance. I mean, the companies cease to exist. They literally cease to exist. So it's okay for the managing director, who probably now, or the chief executive, who possibly now lives in Monaco or somewhere. But the rest of the guys who worked there don't have jobs. Yeah, they ended up because their skills were specific to the investment casting industry. The only way they can find new jobs that take their skills is by moving somewhere else. And some of them will have moved somewhere else, but a lot of them spent a lot of time unemployed. Years later, I was working with a big bank. They wanted to automate some of their financial processes. And I still found that managers were only prepared to look at short-term responses, instead of what they really needed to do, which was to restructure their processes. Their processes were all wrong. So before they automated, they really need to do a complete analysis of their company work processes. Now they took this costs money, but the improvements in efficiency would have gained them more business, far more than they would have had to charge to cost to actually do the process. I worked with a bunch of nurses. What we were looking at was to improve the survival rate of neonatal, what we call perinatal births. That's people born before they should have been, past 27 weeks, but well before 40 weeks of gestation. The chances of survival are very low from 27 weeks. But if you do the right things, if you monitor the right things, you can keep them going. But a lot of the nurses were worried that we were trying to replace them. Yeah, and so getting them to actually comply with the whole process was very difficult. We weren't trying to replace them. Fortunately now we've been able to do some work which they've understood as giving them better understanding of when to intervene, which has meant that we've improved recovery rates by survival rates by 30% over former methods. And we've got a publication going into the British Medical Journal that won't get me any points in computer science, but it's a very nice thing to have as an outcome for a piece of work. So we're going to start with the financial issues. And one of the reasons why it's easy, we're going to do that, is it's easier to quantify. Now, in a later lecture, and I think it might be given by Gail, she's going to think about other risk factors that you've got to take into consideration. Yeah. So today we're just looking at basically the NPV, net present value, and the IRR. But one of the problems that people have if they did that investment in Southeast Asia was they didn't see the 1998 currency crisis in Southeast Asian countries where the Thai economy virtually collapsed. The Thai baht went to not worth having in its value. So if you'd invested in Thailand and all your money had gone there instead of in your factory, you've lost all your money, you know? So things you need to wonder about when you're going to make an investment is what are the risks, what's the actual probability? And people didn't look at the fact, and it was very difficult not to. One of the reasons I know how short-sighted people were is that the person who wrote the software for the company that I worked for in Southeast Asia in 1998 had not allowed enough characters in the exchange rate field for the exchange rate we reached very quickly in 1998 between several of the currencies that we were dealing in, that we had to work in. And as a result, I ended up having to rewrite some software that was several tens of thousands of lines long. I had to find the errors in this thing. There was no... Sorry, I always like to beef about this one. There was no paperwork behind this thing. It was me having to read the stupid program from beginning to end to find where the stupid thing was going wrong and find where this person had left these figures, and I had to change them. The only good thing about his software was he used variable names that made sense. So when I read his software, I knew what the variables were, so I knew what it was doing. It took, well, it put a lot of pressure on myself and on the accountant for our local, the local branch where I was working in Manila, and fortunately, we found it and cured it before anybody else in Southeast Asia in our company had to deal with it, so we were able to get it out there, get a solution out there for them. So things have to be taken into consideration that aren't just what rate of return can I get for something now? What happens? What's the chances of things happening? Just for a second here, what other risks would there be for my company? Can you think of other risks that might come along? IT ones. IT related things that might happen? Yes.
Might become obsolete.
Become obsolete. Somebody else is doing this better, faster, more effectively than I am. That's one of my biggest challenges. Yeah? So you don't know it, but there's a company called Novacyt. They're my biggest opposition. Okay, the other company, another company that tried to get into the field is Ubisoft. And Ubisoft, I think they made a mistake. They didn't know enough about the product. So they're not getting anywhere, but Novacyt is still a problem for us. Yep. That's one thing. Any other risks you can think of? Happen to any company, could happen to big companies. Something happened to the Travel Exchange company the other day. Travelex? Anyone know what happened to Travelex?
Oh, they're a big IT malware.
Why did they? What happened? Somebody hacked them. Okay, somebody hacks you. Denial of service attack happens to you. How important is that going to be to your product? Yeah? One of the big changes to the product I've got is going to be connecting everything through a web service. So what if somebody takes that down? What's my risk? What's the risk of it just going down due to faults in the system, in the cloud system that it has? How do I make sure that I'm safe against one of the servers going down? Yeah? It's all things you have to think about. So, let's think about the short-term thinking for a second. Suppose you had a choice of receiving £1,000 now or £1,000 in a year's time. Which would you choose? Now, caveats. No risk the money will not be paid in a year's time. Yeah? And, okay, inflation-proofed £1,000, right? So which are you going to go for?
So if you take it now, you can invest it and then perhaps next time.
Right. Good, thank you. You're thinking exactly the same way as my Did you read my notes before you came in? Okay. Most people would think they could invest it and make more money. Yeah? Now, when you're running a firm, a company, you've got to be a bit more... You've got to think in terms of, okay, if I invest this money in my automation or my process or expanding my company or all of these other things we thought of, if I invest my money in that, yeah, I can't go on holiday to Spain on that money, but in a year's time or 3 years' time or 5 years' time, I will be able to go on to holiday in Spain and maybe I'll be able to go on holiday in somewhere more attractive than just going to Spain. Yeah? Anyone think of anywhere more attractive than going to Spain? Obviously not. Right. Okay. So we've got to think. So what we need to do is say to ourselves, how much do I need to get out of this investment in order to make it worthwhile? That's what I have to do found thing. So what I do is to discount the returns to an equivalent present value. How much is this worth today? Yeah? If I make this investment and I know that in 5 years' time I'm going to make this much money, how much is that worth today? And how does that compare? Okay? If you invest, you don't get the payback straight away. You get the payback in the future. Yeah? You have to put money in to get money out. So what we do is one of the things we can do is and the simpler one to calculate is to discount to an equivalent present value figure. Okay, what I'm going to do is take you back to your pre-A-level maths. Okay, so you may not have done GCSE maths, or you may have done it if you did it in a UK school. Compound interest was something that was on the syllabus for GCSE maths and probably for high school maths in, where were you? In China? Yes? At a high school. Did you do compound interest in your maths? Please say you did. Okay, at age 16 I call it. Banks and building societies generally earn compound interest on investments. And mortgage payments work the other way up. Basically, you start out paying a lot more interest, and by the end of your mortgage payment, you're paying mostly off your the money that you borrowed. Yeah, so I've got a mortgage. I won't tell you how much it's for, but at the moment, just under £400 a month is given in to the bank as interest. I calculated the other day that in 10 years' time, I'd be giving them about 40 quid a month, and the rest of that 400 quid would be added to the amount I'm paying off of my, what's it called? The value of my house, or the value, the money that they loaned me in the first place. So it's compounding down, just as for an investment in a building society or a bank, it's compounding up. Yeah. At the end of each period, in the case of a building society savings account, interest is added to the account. So you're not only earning interest on the original sum that you invested, but you're earning interest on the interest that you've done, and it's called compound interest. Those of you who remember the formula, if the sum of money in an account is S at any particular time, we can find this from a formula, a simple one, S equals P times 1 plus R on 100 to the power of N. Now, at some point in these notes, I refer to N as the time in years. N is the period over which you get given. So if you've got an interest rate of R as per annum, then you've got R over N per month, and the N is a 12th of a year rather than a, yeah? So in 1 year you'll have had 12 periods, but your interest rate will only be your R will only be the R that you got for a year divided by 12. Roughly, get it? Okay? P is called the principal, percentage interest rate, and N the number of time periods over which the interest is added. I've noticed in my notes I failed with that one in a bit of time, but there we go. So if I've got 2.5% per annum accrued monthly on an investment of £10,000, then after 12 months I will have £10,253, not £10,250, which is what I would have if it was just simple interest. Woo! I make £3 extra. Okay? Huge sums of money involved here. But if you're working with huge sums of money in the first place, so if you had £1 billion to invest, that would make a bit more difference. The £3 would become a bit higher. So discounting is used to answer the other question, which is to receive a certain sum of money in N years, how much needs to be invested now? This is the inverse of the interest, since the sum of money to be received is in the future, is known, but the principal amount to be invested needs to be calculated. It's called the present value, and we can get it simply by inverting the compound interest formula. So P equals S divided by 1 plus R on 100 to the power of N, and this is where I go wrong. R is a percentage discount rate, N is the number of periods over which we are doing our calculation. I do go over now to using years for N. So how much money will be invested at a discount rate of 10% to yield £200 in 3 years with interest being accrued annually? So it's P equals 200 over 1.1 to the power 3, or £150 and 26.3 pence. Yeah? So let's invest £150 and 27p, and then we'll get slightly more than £200 in 3 years' time. Yeah? We'll be working in bigger sums when we work with a company, but these sums are easy enough to put into your calculator and work out. So, what is the net present value? Now, if you want a good definition of what the net present value is, I found one on Investopedia. And if you click on this link when you get the notes downloaded, it does actually work. This one still exists as a link, I found. So hopefully you'd still be able to bring this one up. The net present value is the difference between the present value of cash inflows and the present value of cash outflows. Net present value is used in capital budgeting to analyse the profitability of a projected investment project. Okay, don't take my word for it. Look at Investopedia. What we're going to do is work out what else we could do with our money. Every investment will have an alternative, and we've been through some of the alternatives that we could have. Therefore, when evaluating the future returns on an investment, we have to take into account the period that will elapse before the money will be received. What we do is called discounting all future cash flows to their present value. So we've worked out what the present value is for a given sum, yeah? £200 down to, on the basis of an interest rate of whatever. What we do is to work out the discounted cash flow. So what is a cash flow? Do you know what cash flow is? Bloke who was lecturing in here before me, that was his major subject of his lecture. It was quite funny to listen to. What's a cash flow?
Money coming in versus money going out.
Yes, good. If you've got a positive cash flow, you're going to win. You may not win big, but you're going to win. If you have a negative cash flow, you're going to lose. And it doesn't matter how big that is, you still lose, okay? So we want to get positive cash flow. Now, when I start a project, the cash flow is going to be negative, right? But if I just think about the negative cash flow at the beginning, I'm not going to invest in anything and my company is soon going to fold, right? Honest, this is what happens. I have to invest money to start with. I have to get people to invest in my product. I have to find access to money so I can actually do things. I end up owing money, but I need to do this in order to make sure I continue to exist. So what I do is I invest money in my company. I need, I reckon, to get my product to market properly, to make sure I start making real money on it, I need to invest £900,000. Okay? Was that my phone? £900,000 has to be invested, right? How much am I going to sell this product for? I'm going to sell it for £7,000 a shot. Yeah? I've got alternatives as well. I can rent it out at £700 a go. Yeah? I'm going to need to borrow £900,000. How many am I going to make of these things? How many am I going to sell per year? So if I'm going to sell 100 a year, that's not going to solve my investment problem for quite a few years, is it? Yeah? How many years can my investors wait before they get their money back? But what if I can sell 1,000 a year of the thing? Yeah? Now I'm looking at 70,000 a year. Yeah? It's still going to be quite a long time before I pay back what I'm doing. So I need to look at these sorts of things. So what we do is to look at the inflows and outflows in the future, over the next 3 years, what we're expecting, what we do now to get things, and we sum them up, basically. Right. Now here's a simplified version of what I've just been saying. A company is thinking of investing £20,000 in the purchase of a new machine that will have a lifetime of 3 years. Right? It might be a CNC machine, computer numerically controlled machine. I want to automate my production line. We worked with companies which were automating their paint spraying lines. We did some of the first automatic paint spraying lines that there were ever done, robot paint sprayers. And one machine did cost about £20,000, yeah, per machine. So, fortunately, they had a lifetime slightly more than 3 years, but they still had a finite lifetime. How much can we produce from the machine? So how much will the cash inflows be? Then we need to add up the cost of running the machine each year to make the remaining cash outflows. So what we're going to do, I've made up some numbers which appear in the next screen. They're not real numbers from a real project, but if I went back in time and looked at the things, I could have got you some real numbers from my paint spraying line. At that time, people could have earned, well actually, mortgage rates at the time I was doing this were at their highest ever in the UK. So you could get, if you loaned money to people to buy a house, you could get 17% on your loan. Yeah? You wouldn't as an individual have got that. Getting 10% was quite possible. Yeah? 2.5% is beginning to push it these days, but if you invested a few years ago, if you invested in China, I think you'd easily have got 6%. No, you don't think so? Wasn't that long ago you could easily have got 6% investing in China. Seriously. I looked at it. You could. Fairly easily. Guaranteed. But 10% is exaggerating what you could get now by a long way. So here's the cash flows. The inflow, £0 now. I spend £20,000 on my machine, my paint sprayer, and as a result, I get £14,000 of income at the end of year one. I need to spend £4,000 maintaining the machine. Next year, I spend £15,000. I get £15,000 in. I spend another £5,000 on maintaining the machine. The next year, I only get £7,000. It's coming to the end of its lifetime, and other people are doing this job as well. So I'm running out of product for this machine, but I don't have to spend so much on maintaining it because I give up using it. So only 2,000 of cash outflows. So my net cash flow is 20 minus 20 plus 25. Present value factor for these, that's, if you remember the formula, you put in the one in the, have I given the, the formula here. So the present value factor is 1 over 1.1 to the power n, assuming 10%. Yeah, so that's 1 plus 1 over 10 over 100, which is 1.1 to the power n. year 0 is n is 0. So 1 over 1.1 to the power 0 is 1. So the discounted value is minus £20,000. The next year it's plus 9,091. The next year it's 8,002, and the final year it's 3,757. So I just about make some money, £1,112 on my £20,000. Yeah? But I've made money. So if I'd offered you £1,112 now, you would have taken it. You wouldn't have had it because you didn't make the investment. I made the investment for you. And I can probably sell your product for junk anyway, so you make a bit more than £1,112 at today's values. Yeah? Not at years to come values, at today's values. Right. Nearly at the end of the lecture space for today, so I'll go on with this tomorrow. We'll look at the internal rate of return. This uses the same basic concepts, but it's slightly more confusing. Basically, it's working out what my mouse has stopped working. Hello. Yay. It's working out what this number here should be, instead of knowing this number here, what's the present value factor. Yeah, it's kind of the upside down set of things. And a lot of people in companies, most of the companies I've talked to, always wanted to know, what's the IRR, internal rate of return? What is it? What is it? Why am I going to get it back? How does that compare to the 10% I want? Yeah? Any questions? Was it worth getting out of bed for this morning? That's the question that's